It's funny how the biggest ideas often make our impact smaller. How looking closer at soil has helped us grow our thinking. And by creating digital tools that make resource use more precise, we use less. Like many industries, agriculture uses data to evolve, but you might not see our greatest innovations because they help keep what the Earth has given us right where it belongs. We give back by moving forward.
We've deliberately invited two companies that are in different ways at the heart of some of the controversies around sustainability. Monsanto has, I wrote a piece a few years ago about them, and I remember the CEO saying almost every major public policy issue of the day, I'm involved in some kind of storm about it, whether it be GM foods or the role of IP or water or whatever. And then obviously the airline industry, which provided most of us our unsustainable trip here, has become a target of some of the deeper green elements for saying we should all stop traveling by plane and stay home instead and use video conferencing or something. But I'm glad we didn't on this occasion, although hopefully we're planting a few extra trees to ameliorate some of the effects of that. So, gentlemen, I want to start with Mike. What for you, in the business community, do you see as the state of this debate about sustainability and what role you should be playing in it?
Yeah, well, very good, Matthew. So good morning, and thanks for hosting this important dialogue today. I think sustainability, if you go back just a few years, companies, would claim sustainability, and it could be planting a tree, and that could be the definition. And today, of course, that's not the case. I think society, consumers, even share owners want to know what specifically are you doing, and ultimately, is your business about sustainability? And so that's how we think about it. We're a company that just focuses on agriculture. I think agriculture is really at the center of dealing with climate change. Farmers know firsthand, because they experience it in their fields and on their farms, that the climate is changing. And so, and as Ruth said from Cargill, how do you feed a growing population on a planet that's getting hotter and drier? And, we think the solution is to give farmers tools and technologies that ultimately allow them to be more efficient. How do you grow more using less fuel, less water? And what we're focused on now is how do you make agriculture carbon neutral? And so that's what we're focused on, along with other companies in our industry. And so we're very optimistic that agriculture can continue to get more and more sustainable, and that we can play a role in that.
And where have you seen the greatest progress so far as a company?
Yeah, so I think, as a lot of people probably know, when you plant a tree or a crop, it sequesters carbon into the soil. And so what we've learned is, if you create a system around how you do production agriculture or modern agriculture, you can literally make modern agriculture carbon neutral. And it starts with planting high quality seeds. And so through breeding technologies, we've been able to make plants more vigorous, to be either more drought hardy or produce higher yields, or both. How do you use water more efficiently? And then ultimately, the new area that's really emerging is around data science. And so that's probably the field that I'm most excited about, is how do you use data and analytics to help growers and farmers around the world be more efficient with resources and ultimately grow crops that can feed the planet.
So Philippe, what for you, how do you define sustainability? How do you view it at the moment?
Well, firstly, I'd like to say that maybe not all airlines are created quite equally, so I think some of us are doing a little more than others in this space. Cathay, we're very fortunate. We're part of a larger holding company, the Swire Group, which is a family-owned business, sixth-generation family. And family businesses obviously tend to, and if they got through to the sixth generation, they've been doing something right, steward resources for the next generation. So we kind of have that as an inbuilt focus. And as a result, we've really focused on where we can reduce the impacts. We see aviation as being an extremely important global good, actually, in terms of the economic benefits that it's created and interactions between communities, et cetera, et cetera. So for us, it's focusing on the key impact areas, For us, the obvious one is fuel. One of the reasons that we made, actually one of the first to make an investment directly in a waste to fuel. I mean, obviously, Mike and I were talking a little bit earlier about the food, fuel, land use dynamic. And for us, the use of waste, a commodity that we're not going to run out of anytime soon, into biofuels seems to be to us a good way of progressing.
And how do you view the current sort of the consumer's attitude to this? I mean, one of the I suppose the strengths of the airline industry is that consumers want to fly, but equally, I mean, from what I've seen, there isn't a great enthusiasm for paying more to carbon neutralize their travel and so forth.
Yeah, it's, unfortunately, it's a very astute observation. People say they do, and we have a carbon offset scheme, and we have some wonderful carbon offset programs as a result. The take-up rate of the carbon offset scheme, which the consumers said they wanted, is a fraction of 1%. And a general long-haul flight costs you about $10. So in an era of thumbable choice on your phone, and you're looking at a price, we're in a sort of mass commoditization. It's a challenge to find that differentiation and to target the markets that actually are interested. And we're seeing it. We're beginning to see, little bit by little bit, certain of our consumers say, yes, we like the fact that you've got more fuel-efficient planes and you're using recycled plastics and fishing nets to make your in-flight carpets and your MSC seafood on board. It's beginning to happen, but it's an education process and finding that price premium more.
But you don't think the consumer is going to drive this enough?
Oh no, I don't think the consumer drives it. I mean, eventually, the consumer, we hope, will take it as a consideration of their choice. But no, we see our responsibility as being leading that and demonstrating, and we will continue to do something. We will continue to look at funding biofuels and closing waste loops where we can and electrifying our ground transportation components and so forth. Yes.
But do you think the airline industry could ever be a fully sustainable industry with with carbon neutral output, or is that just impossible?
Nothing's impossible. Nike's here. Nothing's impossible. I would like to believe so. I've seen some, even in my tenure, 25 years, I've seen some extraordinary advances in engine technology and composite materials. So I have to believe with the right sources of fuels, we could eventually get there. Time frame? Questionable, but can we get there? I think definitely.
And what's been the biggest advance you've seen? So it has been the engines, hasn't
It's definitely the engines. Well, I said the engines. I mean, for those of you who've flown on the 787 or the A350, we've now got A350-900s coming in to the Americas. You can actually, it's a higher humidity in the cabin. So you actually feel better because the composite materials can be pressurized to a greater degree. So again, even the customer, and maybe this is where the customer starts getting interested. Oh, I feel better. It's a more conducive environment. I will now choose that airline over the free dentistry that I can get on another airline. Sorry, did I say that out loud? I'm sorry.
Matthew, can I jump on that same question? Because in our business, we're very fortunate because we sell our products to farmers. And, farmers around the world are incredible stewards of their land because often they're trying to pass it on to the next generation. And so the question on, will your customers pay for sustainability? I don't think our customers think in that exact way, but ultimately, if you can help them be more efficient, grow more using less water or fertilizer or pesticides, they'll embrace that because ultimately that will improve their profitability, and they're looking for ways to make their farming practices more sustainable. Now, of course, at the consumer level, I think there is clearly some myths that would say if you go backwards in time and you farm the way people farmed 50 years ago, now, firstly, you couldn't feed the world population that's here today if you did that. But secondly, farming in that way is much more carbon intensive. And so typically in that way of farming, you do a lot more tillage of the land. And so you take a tractor and a cultivator through the field to control weeds. And when you disturb the soil, you release all the carbon that's in the soil. And so there's this view that some consumers now today, it's a small percentage of the total food basket, but that an older way of farming is actually more sustainable. And the reality is that modern agriculture truly creates more sustainable farming and ultimately much more sustainable food security.
And in terms of the consumer, though, I mean, how do you sort of deal with, say, the rising tide of opposition to GM food?
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think, as a company, we own this directly because we have been the leaders in GMO technology. And we've seen the benefits. So this will be the 21st year that farmers use GMO technology. It's helped them be more productive. It's helped them use less pesticides. We think that's a good thing. It's helped them become more profitable. That's a good thing. And early on, we focused on working with our farmer customers to help them understand the benefits of the tools. We didn't engage in these kind of dialogues to say this is why society needs farmers to have modern tools to be more productive and be more efficient. And it's why we now today participate in forums like this, because we know that we have some responsibility to help, engage in the dialogue to say, this is why we believe farmers need these technologies, and this is why we do what we do. I've been with the company for 29 years, and I've had a chance to travel the world, and I've seen firsthand, whether it's modern agriculture here in the Americas or firsthand in sub-Saharan Africa or in Asia, where smallholder farmers, it changes their life when you give them high quality seed and some of these other tools. And so that's why it's so important, I think, that we help engage in the dialogue so that we can have a more robust conversation about the needs for modern agriculture.
Philippe, in terms of technology, what do you see as the potential for further innovation? I mean, obviously, with cars, we're seeing the move from gas to battery. I mean, is that something? Are we soon going to have? How long away is the battery-operated
planes?
747 or whatever.
Yeah, a little bit heavy, unfortunately, still batteries to get those in the air. So I think a little way off. Although we did see the solar impulse, we saw the amazing advances that have been made even in solar energy. So I think while we have the internal combustion engine, that's kind of why we're focused on the biofuel component of it. But where really the impact, I think, can be made is the mass personalization that's now capable. I mean, again, Mike, using your example around the data analytics, if we can identify, if you just think about the waste that is generated, and let's talk about food waste that's generated in aviation today, and you think about those wonderful quality meals that you get on other carriers, you might not finish them. And it generally creates quite a significant amount of waste. The mass
So you're saying the budget airlines are more sustainable because they make us buy our own food?
They're certainly more profitable. But the challenge there is if you can target, if I know exactly what it is that you want and I can provide it and my supply chain is now able to deliver that, waste is reduced and your satisfaction is increased. So I think that to me is an interesting space. And then obviously any advances we have on the fuel side.
So we were talking in the first panel about data analytics, and I know you've done a lot of investing in that area. What is that coming up with any surprising routes to more sustainable agriculture?
Yeah, the answer is yes. Every year in every field, a farmer makes about 40 decisions. Starts with when to plant a crop, what kind of crop to plant, what the density of the seed, and how to treat it with fertilizer and other technologies to ultimately harvest time and how to market the crop. It's clear that all of these decisions are multivariable. And what we've learned is by bringing together big data, we can create algorithms that can clearly help advise farmers to be more efficient. And it's an emerging field, and so it's early days. Last year, in fact, we had about 5 million acres here in the U.S. where farmers were paying for the service. This year, we'll have over 25 million acres. And so that's how quickly this technology is ramping up and farmers are adopting it. And for example, it's things like how do you use fertilizer more efficiently? And so how can you help a farmer understand as the crop is growing and as the weather progresses through the year, do you need to come in and apply more fertilizer or do you not? And again, it's these are tools that data and analytics can help farmers make. And again, it's just like most tools, it's a tool in the toolbox. You're still going to have farmers that are going to use their own judgment to say, okay, what makes best sense on my farm? But I clearly see this is going to transform agriculture, and it's going to improve it significantly.
I mean, I was recently talking to the founder of AeroFarms, which is one of these urban farming companies that's opened up in Newark. And I mean, essentially, they're doing away with outdoor farming altogether. I mean, the ability to control light, water, fertilizer, everything in a way that nature maybe makes impossible. It seemed to give it a real potential.
Yeah.
Do you think ultimately we'll start to move to a world where most farming is done in warehouses in city suburbs?
Yeah, so I think, that's a great example of, another way of using technology to help feed a growing planet. So I think it's fantastic. Now, typically today, at least, it's with shallow-rooted crops, and so it'd be hard to see that in the future with, broader crops, that you could really farm it that way. So, I think the reality is back in the 1960s, there was about an acre of land to feed every person on the planet. Today, there's about a third. By 2030, there'll be about a quarter of an acre. So that's likely going to continue to be the primary source of producing food for people on the planet for a long, long time. And so that's why I think we need all kinds of agriculture. We need vertical farming, and we need modern agriculture in the field as well.
So I'm going to throw it open in a second to the audience, so please be thinking up some questions for our panelists. But I wanted to ask both of you, there is this sense that the private sector now, even more so after last week's announcement by the president, the private sector has to step up and take the lead in delivering sustainability, and that certainly estimates as to how much extra investment would be needed from the private sector run into the trillions a year. And yet, at the same time, and this is obviously an issue that The Economist debates a lot, there is this perception of tremendous short-term pressures on companies to maximize their quarterly earnings and not do those long-term things. How big a constraint is that short-term pressure on each of your companies, and what would you want investors to see from investors to help you actually do some of these more pro-sustainable investments that are needed? Philippe?
So again,
you've got a family situation, so different.
Well, we're split. So we have a publicly listed entity in Hong Kong, Swire Pacific. Cathay Pacific is also listed. We've never been held to quarterly results anyway, which I think is a very good thing. So we are able to invest long term. Frankly, the great quote from Sir Richard Branson: "The fastest way to become a millionaire: start as a billionaire and run your own airline." Frankly, that's true of our industry. It's perhaps not the best investment that one can have. So the question comes, and this sort of really ties into the sustainability theme. I want to see analysts actually asking us about the long-term liabilities of carbon, the long-term liabilities of waste and how to treat it. What are we doing in terms of enabling our supply chain? If you think about aviation holistically, you've got airports. What are airports doing? They are effectively monopoly suppliers. Are they incentivizing the use of biofuels, the use of new aircraft that have lower emissions, that have got smaller noise footprints and these kinds of things, all the way through the supply chain to ground, electrification of ground vehicles? So I think we'd like to see more active engagement on that side, and hopefully, as an investor, I would want to know, what is your carbon liability if there is a carbon price that's going to be set? And that's one of the reasons I think aviation has moved as an industry to avoid the patchwork quilt of different tax grab opportunities, to try and say, look, we'll take our role seriously, we will look to be carbon neutral growth by 2020.
Because I know, Branson had the Carbon War Room that tried to come up with some proposals to deal with, to produce an industry approach on this. Did that produce anything useful?
I think one really interesting piece, obviously choosing not to deflect immediately into marine, but if we look at the marine sector, who were quite stung by what the Carbon War Room did in terms of ranking vessels, and there was an outcry when they said, well, look, this is the publicly available information. That's what we're using. If you want something to be more, the specifics around what you're doing, then disclose that information. And I think that approach in aviation, I think, would be a very good one. And I think that comes back to this point about the consumer behavior and the education, and how then do you potentially choose based on some criteria other than price.
And for Monsanto, again, we believe that our business is sustainability, and it's a good business to be in. And it also starts in our own backyard. And so we made a commitment back in December of 2015 that our own footprint would be carbon neutral by 2021. And so we're working really hard. We had a great year last year, making significant improvements. And so for example, we produce a lot of seed around the world, which means that we're farmers ourselves. And so now what we're doing, for example, is we're using data tools on all of our farms. We are moving to low water use irrigation systems. We're putting field monitors, soil monitors in the field.
But you're in an industry that is consolidating, and you're part of the consolidation. I mean, so that's often a bad sign for long-term investments and things as industries.
Not at all. In fact,
crunch companies together.
I think the contrary. So our industry needs consolidation because it's inefficient. There was too many large players, and it needs more R&D. And so you're right. We are, in fact, we are being acquired right now by a German company called Bayer, which is a very good company. And the whole idea is, how do you make agriculture more of a system? How do you bring all parts of it together, from the seed to the data science to the biological ideas, traditional crop protection technologies, and how do you bring this together, invest more in R&D? See, you started, Matthew, by talking about quarterly challenges. We invest as a company today about $1.5 billion in R&D every year. It takes over 10 years to bring a new technology to the marketplace, not only from a discovery standpoint, but because of regulatory hurdles, which is fine. But we're making long-term investments, and so that's why our industry is consolidating right now. You're seeing Bayer and Monsanto come together. You're seeing Dow and DuPont come together because we need more scale to serve global agriculture and to increase the investments in R&D.
Okay, I want to turn to the audience now. I hope we have lots of questions. Do raise a hand if you have a question. We'll bring a microphone to you. I can't believe that a Texas audience is going to be sleepy. Here we are. Someone right at the front. Please say who you are and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Mary McLean. I'm at the Sackler Institute for Nutrition Science at the New York Academy of Sciences, so based in New York. And I will be part of a panel later on this afternoon that's discussing sustainability of food, but also how to maintain nutritional quality and have this equation sorted. So my question is for you, Mike. There is potential for genetically modified crops to not only improve sustainability, but also improve the nutritional output of the crop that is being produced. But one of the criticisms of GMO, other than the health issues that has been dealt with scientifically, is biodiversity effect. How do you incorporate that in the equation? Because sustainability is not just about water use, soil erosion, and greenhouse gas emissions. There is a huge challenge with maintaining biodiversity.
So it's biodiversity an inevitable casualty of efficiency.
Right, and also earlier in the question was about, how do you have enough food, but also good food quality? And, the reality is, today in our planet of 7.5 billion people, there's close to 1 billion that are malnourished, and there's about 2 billion that are obese. And we're often seeing that in areas where people are going from being malnourished, they actually step right into obesity. And so there's clearly an issue where we need to make sure that people are getting a well-balanced plate of food, and we believe that's important. Now, in terms of biodiversity, we promote in all areas where we sell our technologies that farmers should rotate crops and rotate practices. I think that's very important, and farmers know this. They've known this historically, that no matter what your farming practices are, you have to change up what you do year in and year out, because biologically, if you don't make changes, then you end up with new insects or new diseases that create problems. And so I think your point is right. And again, it's why companies like Monsanto need to continue to develop new tools and technologies to continue to stay ahead of the biological challenges that will naturally challenge farming. And so that's how we think about it.
Do we have another question from a gentleman right at the front here? The microphone's just coming across, and please again do say who you are.
I'm Ted Lara with the City of Austin, a data architect. There's a strong local grow local movement in Austin, and the benefits are low transportation costs, building a tighter community. Having a community bring its food together. Of course, you can't do everything. Mm-hmm. So the question I have is, mostly for Mr. Frank, is does Monsanto have a policy or outlook on how to support Grow Local, not just providing the seeds, but encourage that for reasons other than just sustainability in an environmental sense, but sustainability in a community sense?
Yeah. So Ted, thanks for the question. I can't say we have a specific policy per se, but the way I think about it is, if you help farmers anywhere be more productive, then obviously your local community farmers markets and whatnot can have more produce and more food and be, you know, more successful. So, you know, we support all kinds of agriculture. We are the world's largest supplier of seeds to the fruit and vegetable market. We sell a lot of our seed to even organic growers. And so, look, we think that, you know, the world needs all kind of agriculture to be more sustainable and more productive. And we work with farmers locally to figure out how do we help them. And so I think agriculture is very local. Even though we have global R&D strategies and some global technologies, ultimately you have to adapt agriculture to the local needs. And so, you know, everywhere that we operate, we have a lot of local presence because that's how agriculture works.
So we have a question from the app about whether biodiesel should have carbon neutral status. What do you think?
I think yes is the short answer. The long answer is biofuels are already being used widely in aviation. In fact, every delivery aircraft that we have coming out of Toulouse, the new A350-900, has 10% biofuel on it. And it's only limited to 10% because that's the approval process. You could run 100% on biofuel today. The two are interchangeable. So I think the carbon neutrality component of that, what we call zero rating of biofuels in aviation, is definitely one way of getting to the carbon neutral status. And clearly one of the big components behind that is what is the source. And again, as I mentioned, I think if we're using waste materials, we're taking potential global warming impacts out of that from the waste materials and using it for fuel.
So you have to. So not all biofuel is the same in terms of its carbon footprint.
Absolutely not. And I think again, Mike and I were discussing this earlier. If there can be a link between, you know, some modification of seeds that produces food stock and the waste materials of that food stock can be utilized for production of biofuels. You know, if you think of corn stover, corn waste, that would seem to us to be quite a sensible closing of that particular loop.
I mean, how fast do you expect disclosure requirements and therefore a more sophisticated conversation about what footprints actually are and, you know, what strategies really are sustainable as opposed to this sort of rather broad brush approach we get at the moment? And how quickly do you expect that to change and that to help you if you are serious about sustainability? Yeah,
I mean, clearly we're in a slightly unusual position of wanting more regulation in this side because we think it actually will level the playing field a lot more. It will encourage much better behaviours. There are plenty of people who don't want that.
Can you lead voluntarily?
Absolutely, and we do. And there's a consortia of airlines that is called the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Users Group, and that is driving a lot of the development in this space. So yes, I would encourage more regulation, and we're a highly regulated industry anyway, which causes, you know, we can't consolidate globally in the way that pretty much any other business can, because of the reasons of sovereignty and foreign ownership and those kinds of things. So yeah.
What about you, Mike? Do you think there'll be a lot more transparency, a lot more?
Well, I think there is already, and you know, while I agree with a lot of what Philippe just mentioned, you know, I don't think agriculture needs more regulation. I think, again, as a public company, there are incentives for us to be very transparent on what we do, how we do it, what our carbon footprint is. It's why we've made a commitment to be carbon neutral by 2021 on our own footprint. So I think, you know, companies that can embrace this, they'll have an advantage. And I think that's how the market should work. But, you know, and when I talk to, again, farmers around the world, they don't need more regulations. They want to be sustainable. They're trying to do the right things on their farms. And so I think that's a better approach for agriculture.
And I mean, we're pretty much out of time. So I wanted to ask each of you, you know, what's the hardest challenge you're wrestling with as you think about your sustainability goals, and where do you see the biggest opportunity? And, you know, when you're thinking about carbon neutral, by, you know, in 4 years now, what's going to be the hardest part, biggest hurdle you have to overcome to get there? And then secondly, what's the biggest opportunity?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest challenge for us in our industry and for us as a company, whether it's Monsanto or the combination that we'll have with Bayer, is that there is a lot of misinformation about what sustainability looks like in agriculture. And so we do need to do a better job and engage in broader dialogues like this to help, you know, define what does true sustainability look like in agriculture. So I think that's our biggest challenge. There's lots of myths and misperceptions out there, and so we need to do a better job of articulating that. Again, I'm very optimistic. You know, we already know how to produce grain crops in a carbon neutral way. It's don't till the land, use high productive seed, use biotech products where you can to minimize your pesticide use, and grow cover crops and sequester more carbon into the soil. If you do those things, that's what we define as carbon neutral farming, and farmers are already adopting that, and the more we can put systems and add data and analytics to help them be even more efficient, that's where agriculture is going.
The public perception of aviation is I think, that we're a far greater portion of the issue around carbon emissions than actually is the case. I'm sure this audience is aware, you know, we're not at the 10 and 20% of global emissions through aviation. We're actually about 2.5, which is about the same as data centers for comparative purposes. So I think the challenge for us, again, it's this education process. How do you make people want to choose based on criteria that we think are a more responsible, more sensible way of developing an industry?
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for a very wide-ranging and stimulating conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Good. Thanks.